All right, so this is the neurobiology and hormones section, and there are going to be 8 short videos. And so this is our first, and this is really talking about nervous system infrastructure. And so basically our nervous system is made up of nerves, which are made up of nerve fibers, which eventually the smallest unit is the neuron. And this is the basic unit. It's a cell like any other cell in your body. And so what I need you to know is it has some basic parts. The first one is the cell body. That is the part that actually every cell has. That's where the nucleus is. And if you've taken a biology or a science class and they talked about cells, that's where all the organelles are. The things like mitochondria, which makes ATP, and the Golgi apparatus, which is a kind of a warehouse which ships things like proteins and ribosomes that make proteins, things like that. So that is the functioning basic cell structure. Then off of that, there are 2 ends. One is the dendrites, and the dendrites are usually short and branched. And you can see them up on the top left of the picture where the arrow is. And that is sending signals. It's coming into the neuron and sending it toward the cell body. The other side is the axon, and the axon is usually long and singular, and that will send signals away from the cell body. And so, again, lots of dendrites, highly branched, and then usually one single axon coming out the other side. So there's a lot of different types of neurons. We're not going to go into them real big, but there are sensory neurons, photoreceptors like our eye. There are actually technically electromagnetic receptors. So that's actually how snakes, pit vipers will actually pick up heat for mammals. We have chemoreceptors. Those are we use for taste and smell. And then we have mechanoreceptors, which are pick up pressure. So that sense of getting full is a mechanoreceptor, or when somebody touches your skin and you feel pressure, that's a mechanoreceptor. Motor neurons are neurons that go to the muscles, glands, and organs and create typically a contraction in muscles or some kind of movement in glands or organs, secretion, something like that. And then we have the interneurons. Inter just means between. Like we have interstates in California. The 10 is an interstate because it goes basically from California all the way to Florida through the states. And then the 60 would not be, because the 60 never leaves our state. So it's just Highway 60. And so those will go from sensory and spinal neurons out to motor neurons. And then we have the neurons of the brain. Now, lots and lots of different types, and I decided not to go into them all. Because they're not all well labeled. There's hundreds of them, different types, and they're hard to label because some can be labeled by what they secrete or what their function is, but some of these do multiple things. Some I don't think we're even sure what exactly they're doing. So that's where a lot of the neuroscience is looking at right now. All right, and then we also have places called neuron clusters. We have those on our spinal cord. We have those in our brain. And so they're called ganglion in the PNS, which stands for peripheral nervous system. This is kind of where a lot of the cell bodies are, and then you have the dendrites and axons kind of branch out. So anytime you have some area that's highly sensitive, you may have a ganglion nearby. A good example of that is in your wrist. We have a ganglion right here, and that ganglion is a bunch of cell bodies, and so the nerve parts can go into your fingers and help for all that information coming from your fingers. So there's a ganglia right here. My wife actually had issues with hers where it swelled up, and it didn't really hurt. She just didn't like the way it looked. It was fluid, and I'm amazed medical science. And she went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, "Yeah, I can get rid of that. I'm gonna just take one of my medical books and hit it really hard, and it'll pop the bursa and reabsorb it." So she decided against that. I told her, "No, I'd do it for free." I do not hit my wife. She hits me. No, it's all a joke. But anyway, so it went down on its own. But anyway, so you have ganglion throughout. There's one in the groin area. There's quite a few of them in some of your ankles. But anyway, it's a ganglion. Now, when that ganglion is in the brain, when that cluster is in the brain, we call it a nuclei. And I want to use that term because you hear about Alzheimer's, and that's one of the things they're researching. They see these plaque buildups, and a lot of times it's around these ganglia nuclei. So often that's a diagnosis once you have Alzheimer's. Unfortunately, that is post-mortem. All right, and then we want to talk about glia. And glia actually makes up most of your brain. It is the supporting cells. And early on, they just assumed it was kind of structural. But now what they're finding out, lots and lots of things they do. So we have some in the CNS, which is the central nervous system, and then some in the PNS, which is the peripheral nervous system. So we'll talk about the CNS real quickly. The oligodendrocytes, those are the ones that actually put like an insulation up and over the neurons in the brain. This is used to speed up a signal, and we'll talk about that shortly in probably the next video. And then we have the microglia, and that's the brain's immune system. That's kind of keeping the brain healthy. They can secrete things. We have the astrocytes, and this is the most common one, and it creates the blood-brain barrier. And so that is, we really are trying to keep pathogens and viruses and things out of your brain. And so that doesn't allow much to get into the brain to keep it healthy when you have an illness. The epidermal cells, they line the brain. So they're kind of aligning, but those are what produce our spinal fluid, or cerebral spinal fluid. And then the last, the radial glia, and these are stem cells. And if you don't know about stem cells, these are cells that have the ability to become other cells. And so we've always, early on we said that the brain developed and then you didn't get any more brain cells. Well, it turns out that is not true. The brain can regenerate new pathways. And then in the peripheral nervous system, we have Schwann cells, and those again are used for insulation, speeding up signals, very similar to the oligodendrocytes in the brain. But these are the ones also that are doing the immune response to the nerves in the peripheral system. And then the last one is the satellite cells. They keep chemical balances to make sure the way our neurons work is through an electrical signal we'll talk about. And so this is keeping all the ions and things balanced. And then the last thing we'll talk about real quickly is reflexes. We want to kind of just do the real basic structure. And so this is when a sensory neuron is connected directly to a motor neuron, or there is one, a little interneuron in between. And so what happens with these are the signal doesn't actually get to the brain. You're not making a decision. Your body is just doing it for you. Your brain eventually figures out something happened, but these are protective measures. And so the knee jerk is a reflex action. That's the one you go to the doctors, they're checking your reflexes. They'll hit you on the knee, the patella, and get that flexor muscle to jump. And this is really actually a protection to make sure that you don't overextend your knee. And so that is in place, but there's other ones. When things come quickly at your face, you have a blinking response. That is to protect your eyes. You flinch, and that would be a reflex. You jump to loud noises. That's another reflex. That's early on, and children are scared of loud noises. And then another one that you might not think of much, but one of the scores they do with newborns, when a newborn is born, one of the things they do is they will rub the cheek looking for a reflex. And if you rub the cheek, actually the reflex is to turn toward the rubbing, and that is for breastfeeding. So to see if the baby, usually if it's rubbed like that, it'll reach to suckle and get milk. All right, so we'll stop it right there. For that is the first recording.